Okay, I'm recording it now. Okay, so for our practice thesis, it says, does the US Constitution create a system that ensures a participatory democracy? So by the first sentence, I need to know what your response to that prompt is. By the first sentence, I need to know whether or not you think the US Constitution creates a system that ensures a participatory democracy and why that's the case. So that's what I mean by a line of reasoning. If you simply restate the prompt, you do not get the thesis point. Understand the thesis point, just like an APUSH and just like an AP World, it's an all or nothing thing. Either you get it or you don't. But the requirements for it are not as strict as APUSH or AP World. You need a reason and a justification, or an argument, a position, and a justification. That's simple. And that's what we mean when we say a defensible position. Do not be wishy-washy, okay? I understand that it's a little more of an intellectual challenge to try to find a middle ground, but for the sake of the AP exam, that is not the place to take those kinds of risks. The AP people want you to take a defensible position. So oftentimes these issues are not black and white, but for the purposes of your argumentative essay, you're going to save yourself a lot of trouble if you make create a clear-cut position. No one's going to dig up your response in 20 years if you run for president of the United States and say, oh my God, look at what they claimed 20 years ago. This person is miserable. You shouldn't elect them. Okay? So don't worry about that. Although I will keep it for blackmail.
Can you look at the chat real quick?
That means the current Constitution, Mr. Rabbani. Or not, that wasn't Mr. Rabbani. That was Mr. Allahan that said that.
That's racist.
Okay, very good. So evidence and reasoning. Evidence and reasoning. So you need two pieces of evidence to support your claim. You get 1 point, right? You get 1 point for simply mentioning a foundational document that connects to the claim, okay? You get another point for showing that you understand the document and how it connects to the prompt, not even to your thesis. Then you get the maximum points. You get the 3 points for connecting the evidence to your claim. So this is where, remember, I always say, show, don't tell. Show the reader how the evidence supports the argument that you're trying to make, okay? The second evidence part and reasoning part B, that's the same thing. You just do that again, except this time it doesn't have to be a foundational document. So up here in part A, you have to use one of the foundational documents they give you. Down here, it can be any other source, okay? It can be something you learned in class. It could be something you read about. It could be a news article. It could be a historical fact. It could be anything, any source of information. It could be an example of how a concept is applied. Doesn't matter. You get a point for citing that. You get another point for explaining how it connects to the topic. And then you get the last point for explaining how it supports your argument. So going back to the participatory democracy one, right now all you have to do is develop a claim. Then when we get into the evidence, you would get a point for perhaps mentioning the Constitution. I'm sure that would be one of the foundational documents we would reference, and connecting it to the establishment of participatory democracy, right? You would get another point for explaining how the Constitution relates to participatory democracy. And then you would get your third point for explaining how the Constitution or whatever you cite from the Constitution supports the specific argument you're making, okay? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
The biggest advice that I can give you, and I know that this is probably going to sound shocking, but avoid the fluff, right? Less is more, okay? You are not trying to be the next Walt Whitman, okay? You are just responding to the prompt, to the question. Any questions about the argumentative essay? Now, what's a little bit tougher is the concept application. This scoring rubric has not changed, but it's different from what I do in class. Believe it or not, the way I score concept application FRQs in class is a little more friendly to you
I don't
than
believe you. I don't believe
Yeah, I don't
the way
either.
the College Board does. Because the College Board,
Right.
mine are 6 points. The College Boards are 3 points. Because I allow you to get partial credit for each part of the prompt. The College Board, each part is all or nothing. You either get 0 or you get 1. And what's not fair about that is you get the same amount of points for describing something as you do for explaining and using evidence and reasoning. Okay, so just because each part is 1 point does not mean that each part deserves the same amount of attention. Okay, so for part A, you're going to be asked to describe a concept. You may be given a stimulus, an excerpt from a news article, a map, it's not a quantitative analysis question, so you probably won't be given a chart or anything. It could be a cartoon. You'll be given something that connects to some concept that we've learned about. So the first part is you're just going to describe whatever concept that this relates to. So I could give you a news article about how 3M is refusing to make more N95 masks, and that the government is not taking action to compel them to do so. And so then the concept, you would talk about iron triangles. You would talk about how 3M represents an interest group in an iron triangle relationship. Part B is the explanation. Okay, so this is where you're going to explain how that concept works in the context of whatever concept you described in part A. So what does the iron triangle relationship have to do with 3M producing or not producing masks? Well, that's when you can then go into the nuance of that relationship. You talk about the different components of it, talk about the congressional committees involved, the bureaucratic agencies involved, and how 3M would or would not be motivated to produce more masks. And then finally, part C is the apply and transfer knowledge. So they're going to give you a scenario and saying, okay, let's assume that there's a different situation, but with the same concept. So let's assume, and it could be related to the iron triangle or interest groups. They could say, assume instead of 3M, we were talking about oil and gas companies. How would that change the iron triangle relationship? So then you would have to use your knowledge of iron triangles and the explanations you provided in part B and explain how those would apply in this new context. Okay, so it's describe, explain and analyze, apply and explain the new application. Okay, and it's 1 point, 1 point, 1 point, all or nothing, all or nothing, all or nothing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So there is no reason that everybody on here cannot get a 5 on this year's AP exam.
Oh,
I don't know yet what the cut score will be, but think of it this way, because this is 7 points and this is 3 points. So that's 10 points. You have 10 points for the AP exam this year. The AP exam this year is out of 10 points. So and this is a hunch, it's not based on anything that I've heard from the College Board. My assumption will be that if you can get a 7, you could get a 5 on the AP exam. Depends on how they do the cut scores, right?
Well, I'll have you on FaceTime, so that should be easy.
Well, so and whether the role of teachers, that's yet to be determined. Obviously, I will be available during that time. I can't tell you how to answer, but I can help guide you in terms of where to find information and those kinds of things. It could even be an 8. It depends on what they do with the cut scores. But That remains to be seen. I'll have a better idea once I do the reading, because I'm going to be doing the reading this year. That's another change too, is that typically 2 readers will evaluate your FRQs. This year they're bumping that up to 3. So you're going to have 3 sets of eyes reviewing your FRQ, just to prevent room for error.
I will be the 1-4. I think that's a good goal for me. You're holding me to a high standard to get a 5, Mr. Murphy.
Remember, last year 50% of the class got a 5. Okay.
And do you know who's in your class last year?
Well, I mean, that doesn't make a difference.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Any
I have a
questions
question.
about
Yeah.
yes, Miss Fever?
Katie said something about an outside reference or whatever. What was that for again?
So that is for your evidence in your FRQ, argumentative FRQ. So evidence part B can be from any source. It can be from another foundational document. You're going to be given 3 foundational documents to choose from. You only have to use 1. You could use 2. Okay. So that could be your B source, your B evidence, a current news item.
Oh, okay.
Something you heard from Mr. Murphy could be your B evidence. Okay. So anything can be your B evidence, just as long as you then connect it to your argument. Now, something I would advise, and it depends on time, if you don't feel confident, okay, if you don't feel confident about one of those pieces of evidence you've used, it does not hurt you. You won't be penalized for adding a spare tire, okay? If you feel like one of those pieces of evidence are running flat, who is that, Mr. Woodruff? If you feel like one of those pieces of evidence may go flat, then add a spare tire, just as some cushioning. And if you do add a spare tire, I would pull from one of the other foundational documents, one of those 3 foundational documents they list, in case the flat tire happens to be a foundational document. Because here's the deal with this. These 2 points here can only be earned if you earned the thesis point, which makes sense. There's no way you could get a point for connecting an evidence back to your thesis if your thesis didn't get credit. Okay. So if you don't
Wait, so can you not?
Go
You can
ahead.
finish.
I said, if you don't have a strong thesis, then the minimum score you could get would be a 1, 2, 3, would be a 4.
So we can use, like, for the other source, we can use another one of those foundational documents though, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that source can be anything.
Okay.
Okay, does that make sense? Now, most
Yeah.
of you have completed the review, the AP exam survey, where I asked you which units you were most comfortable with, which you were least comfortable with. As we look at this unit guide for Unit 1, and this is where we're going to end today, is there anything that you all need a little more clarification on? Anything that would be helpful for me to do a Murphy movie on, or another session on, or additional resources? So just looking at the Unit 1 review guide, is there anything that pops out to you as a type of topic? Mr. Coggins is raising his hand.
I just need to remember which Federalist papers are which, but I could probably do that on my own. But that's the main thing I'm confused about.
Yeah, that will be this foundational documents overview, right? So number 10, you're talking about factions. 51 is talking about checks and balances and separation of powers. 70 is the unitary executive. And then 70 is the one, remember the example I gave you about the police officer sitting in the Suburban arguing, should we go chase a speeder? And then 78 is the judicial branch, judicial review. Ms. Haddad, did you have something?
No, I figured it out.
So we all are comfortable with Unit 1.
Yes.
No.
The compromises sometimes are something people have a hard time with. Federalism is always an issue for folks, but that's how come I created this the quick reference guide for federalism.
Oh, I have a question about that
Mhm.
document, like our assignments.
Mm-hmm.
How recent does a current event thing have to be? Like, I'm really struggling on that part. Like, trying to think of how to connect like pluralism and whatever with now.
The last 10 years.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so it doesn't have to be like this week, but I would say the last 5 to 10 years. These are things that students always struggle with, is the constitutional connections to federalism. We all know about Amendment 10, but talking about the full faith and credit, privileges and immunities, and then the supremacy clause. And then, of course, the difference between dual federalism and cooperative federalism. That's our layer cake and marble cake. I've given you examples of each of those. And then our types of grants, categorical and block grants, and then delegated, reserved, and concurrent powers. Those in Unit 1, federalism is usually the one topic that students often are iffy on. Okay, so no, everyone feels confident then about Unit 1, looking on the review guide. If you change your mind, let me know, and we'll talk about that. But what I'm going to focus on as we do this review is kind of the structure of your FRQs, since that's what your exam is going to be this year. So believe it or not, we won't see much multiple choice during our review sessions and during our review period. So occasionally, I may, just to make sure that we understand the content, I may throw a quick little learning check at you here and there, but.
No.
But it'll all be reviewed. Okay. Any last questions, comments, concerns, curse words?
Yeah, I have a
Jason,
question.
no, in the Zoom call.
Who said they had a question?
Valerie.
Okay, go ahead.
When do you know when we would get like that? You said for the flight for DC or whatever, we're supposed to get an email or something about money back. Do you know when we would get that?
I will get those out to you by the end of this week. I called our friends at American Airlines last week because I was hoping both of our flights ended up being canceled. And I was hoping that they would, because the flights were canceled, that they would just give us a monetary refund. But the best I could get out of them was extending the voucher validity to December of 2021 instead of this December.
That's what I was gonna ask.
Yeah, because we weren't going to go anywhere this year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Going to New Orleans. Already got it planned with the family.
So I will send those out to you. And you are entitled actually to one name change free of charge, so it doesn't have to be you traveling. I'm not going to fool with using them for next year because I'm going to try to get on Delta next year because I'm done dealing with American Airlines.
Okay.
Mr. Murphy, are we doing finals this year?
That's to be determined. We're actually forming a committee at the district level to discuss what the fourth quarter grades are going to look like. And I'm going to volunteer to be on that committee just to make sure that
Sure.
What was that?
So wait, if we had finals, that would be hard. Like, what would we do? Like,
I don't
like,
know.
obviously we have all these other resources around us, so.
Which is interesting that, I don't know, it's maybe you would have to create some performative piece on video. I don't know. It's the interesting thing with AP giving us your essays technically the AP teachers could use that as your final exam, which is something we normally do because we wouldn't get your scores until July.
That's what Miss Tiller's doing. She's using them as our final exam.
But that's just mean because it's an AP exam. Like, what if you like totally like just get nervous and mess up?
Whoa.
That's 10 times better than a Mr. Murphy quiz.
Yeah. Slow your roll there, Christine.
I have a question. Last
Mr.
year,
Dono's give me something to think about. I'll see. Just for old
Oh my
time's sake,
gosh.
we need to take you don't worry. We'll at least have one more Mr. Murphy exam before all this is said and done.
No, it's really
No,
okay.
really don't worry about it. We don't want to hassle you, we're sure you're busy over this quarantine. Literally just take your time, this is your break. You won't have this for a long time, Mr.
I have
Murphy.
all
You're
the
on
time
the
in the
floor.
world. I've spent more time at home in the past 4 weeks than I have in 4 years. So
okay, I have a question, Mr.
Exactly.
Murphy.
yes.
So last year, Jackson told me that your final exam was like you asked actual questions, and then in the back part, it was like, why is the answer to this one A? And then it would be like different answer choices, and it was like, because Mr. Murphy said so, or because blah, blah, blah. Is that what you mean by final?
Well, I mean, you can't I change it up every year. So because I did
Quiet.
something last year doesn't mean that I'm doing something this year. Look, last year we weren't in quarantine for 6 weeks. So
You're right.
who knows? Your final could be watching Andy Bashir's daily update and learning some sign language from Virginia.
Mr. Murphy, I heard that they're gonna try and open up like restaurants and stuff, perhaps in the next month. Is that accurate?
Well, that was part of the controversy out of yesterday's presidential press conference where President Trump said that he would wants things to open up more quickly than the governors and that he can override the governors. What you may
Didn't China
see,
go back into having more cases though?
well, what you may see is some a little dispute between governors and the president. The governor of New York has already come out and said if he's not ready to open things back up, he won't open things back up regardless of what Trump says. You will probably see, though, a phased opening. So what they're saying is it won't be like flipping a switch where the governor comes out and says, okay, next Monday, everything goes back to normal. Have fun. And then all of the hair salons and barbershops have traffic jams. It'll probably start with like the less front-facing businesses. It'll probably go in reverse order from what we saw previously, from what we saw the closures happen. So schools would be towards the lower end of the spectrum. They would probably start with like the businesses that have less person-to-person interaction, and then work their way up to like service industry, the restaurants and things, department stores, those types of things, and then more public government entities, and then our schools.
So we probably wouldn't go back to school.
Well, I mean, we are very close to our peak in Kentucky if we're not already there. So I would
I
say
heard it was mid-May.
well, originally they had said the beginning of May, but actually it's hitting sooner than we anticipated. So we are, I will say this though, the mayor, we have a Zoom call with the mayor of Lexington on Thursday, and we may get a little more information from that, but I think what the governor wants schools to plan for, he has told schools to plan for being closed for the rest of the year, but that doesn't mean they will be. The problem is that there has to be, we have legal requirements for how many instructional hours we get. We have legal requirements for teachers' contract days. So the question would be, how would we deal with those things? They would have to give us some waivers. So,
Mr. Murphy,
mhm.
how's the graduation committee coming along?
Well, the only thing we've done so far is gotten a billboard for you.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I wanted.
But everything else is still up in the air. A lot of it depends on if schools are closed for the remainder of the year. the governor alluded to the fact that he will make a decision next week. So
That's nerve-wracking.
Oh, if it's next
I don't
week,
even care. Like, I want to go back one day. One day. That's it.
yeah, just have
I'm good.
the last day of school.
Exactly. And just to say bye. Bye.
I'm
See
just
ya.
here making this money.
well, I mean, again, I think that it'll be fine. And if anything, some colleges are like doing a fall graduation where you come back.
I will not come back.
Yeah, me neither.
Like, I'm not going to be
I
close
second
to like,
that.
close to come back.
Well, I mean, I'm not talking about like while you after you. I'm talking about before everyone disperses off to college. Like if we can do something
Oh, by
early,
fall, I thought you meant like October.
in early August.
Mr.
Like
Murphy, didn't
before
we make some deal that like if we all got fives, you would do something?
What did I say that?
Yes, you
Yeah, we did.
did.
What was it?
Wasn't it
I
like
can't
sing
remember
or
what-
something?
Yes, it was
Gonna
sing.
throw a banger at Mr. Murphy's house.
Yeah.
It was definitely sing.
It
Caitlin
was.
definitely
I'm
already
pretty
knows
sure.
where you live, so she'll
Okay.
just get address.
If it was singing, then I'll consider that.
Kilt.
Nice.
I'm pretty sure it
Bring up
was.
Kilt.
Oh, shit.
Yes, bring out the kilt and play the bagpipes.
Oh yeah, I still need to sing. I still need to do the kilt.
Mr. Murphy, how about you and Chase do a duet and then Colin raps?
Let's do it.
It would blow up. It would.
He
be
would throw
bomb.
me off key though.
Ooh.
Sunday Blues out now, all platforms.
Yeah,
Nobody
Shameless
knows.
plug.
Stop
I don't think
self-promoting. You're not talented.
Get to my range. Okay. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Also, just in the news, it's official that Joe Biden is the presumptive Democratic nominee. Bernie Sanders dropped out this week,
Sleepy Joe.
last week, and then yesterday
Joe.
Bernie Sanders endorsed Biden, and then this morning President Obama endorsed Vice President Biden.
And it took this long.
I have a question. Then what's the point? Do we still have primary elections?
Yes, because the primaries aren't just the presidential. States will do other offices during the primaries. So Kentucky's primary has actually been moved to June. We are we're doing like local offices. The Senate race has a primary, congressional races. So the presidential primary is not the only thing on the ballot.
But is it still on the ballot? Like, would you still like for some reason?
It's
check
on the
off?
ballot. Yeah, all of the candidates that have been in, that have since dropped out, will be on the ballot. But if you vote for them, the vote won't count.
Okay.
Mr. Murphy, you should go listen to Chase and Colin's new song. It's on all streaming platforms.
Oh.
I will consider.
Not
that.
explicit, I promise.
It's a Christian song.
That is a Christian song.
It's called Sunday Blues.
I will. I'll make that a note of that.
I put it in the chat. You can go listen to it right now.
Okay.
Catch it.
Any other questions or comments? We again, I've given you a weekly overview so that you can keep track of when things are due, and what will be due. Again, right now we're just pretty much in the review phase. So as things come up, let Mr. Murphy know. We will have another one of these tomorrow at 11:30. We'll do some more content review, and then we'll talk about the evidence and reasoning practice. We'll build up off of our thesis statements from today. So make sure that you get your thesis submitted today on Google Classroom so that I can take a look at those and we can fix them before we move on. Okay, sound good?
Sounds great.
Okay, very good. Have a good day. I will see you tomorrow.
Yeah.
Adios.
Chase, you look cute.
You look cuter with your blank screen.
Gentlemen, take it off of the Zoom. Have a good
He's
day.
still recording.
Why
Swag
do you have
Master
like an
4 phone.
industrial microphone, Mr. Frisbee?